Hi and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video tutorial what I'm going to be doing is showing you how to read .txt files from Python, so how to read text files. Okay, so in my text editor here I've got a .txt file and it's just got the text hello on one line, computing on the next line and tutor on the line after that. And what I'm going to show you how to do is how to read the whole file. There's several ways you can do that, and how to read a particular line of the file. Okay, so let's get rid of that for a moment. So let's start off by reading the whole file to a string. How might we do that? So first of all, we've got to open the file. Okay, so this is the line of code that we need to open the file, and what this does is it creates a file object or file handle, which we'll use to read data from the file and manipulate the file. And the method that we use to create this file handle or file object is the open method. And we pass it two parameters, and this parameter here is the name of the file, so the path to the file. So at the moment it's just in the same directory as this Python script, so I can just say textfile.txt as the name of the file. And then the second parameter here is the mode in which we want to open the file. So because we're just reading the file, I'm just going to open it in read mode, so I only want to read the file, so I just type in R there to open it for reading. So what do I do next? Well, next I'm going to create a variable to store the contents of the file. We're creating a program first of all to read the whole file to a string, and that's my line which I can use to read the whole file to a string. So the string is going to be stored in file contents, and we call the read method on the file object or the file handle here, and that will read the whole file to a string. Next we need to close the file. So just say file.close, and you call the close method on the file object here, file handle, and then we print out the, and then if we want to view the what the contents of the file is, we just print out file contents. So let's try running this program now and see what happens. There we go, we get hello computing tutor, and we get the contents of our file. But there is a problem with this, and an error can occur when we run this program. So what I've done now is I've removed textfile.txt from the folder where this Python script is stored. If I run this program now, what I'll get is a file not found error. Okay, so what I've done now is I've created a program which uses a modified program that we had to use exception handling. And if you don't know what exception handling is, go and watch my tutorial video on exception handling, and I explain it there. But basically what I've got here is I've got the code to open the file, read the file and print the contents of the file in my try block. Then what I've got is a two lines here that handles what happens if there is an IO error. And we've got a type of IO error here, we've got a file not found error, and if there is an IO error it will print couldn't open file. And I ran that code a minute ago there with the file still not in this directory that textfiles.py is in, and it printed could not open file. And that's because when it tried to open the file, could not find the file, so it ran this code here with the IO, which is run when an IO error occurs, and that code simply prints could not open file. Then we've got this finally block, and what this finally block does is it says if a file, if a variable with or an object called file is in memory at the moment, then do this line of code. So basically what this means in practical terms for our program is if we manage to open the file here, then try and close the file here. But if we didn't manage to open the file, which might have happened if what we have here, there was a file not found error, then don't bother trying to close the file, because we can't close the file because it's not open. And this finally block will always run regardless of whether there was an exception or not. So this is why we want to have this if statement here to check whether the file was actually opened or not. Okay, so that's how we can read the whole file to a string. Now what I'm going to do is go through how we can read the whole file to a list. And this is sometimes quite useful if you want to manipulate the contents of the file in certain ways. Okay, so what we do to read the whole file to a list is we use pretty much the same code as we've got here. But instead of calling file.read, what we do is we call file.readlines. And this will create a variable called file contents, which holds a list of all of the lines in the file. So each line, hello, computing, and tutor, will be its own item in the list, its own string in the list. And then we're going to print file contents to so we can see what the list looks like. So I've put the text file back in the folder now, so our program should be able to find it. So let's run it. There we go. So what we get is a list of each line of the file as a string. You'll notice that we've got this /n here. This character. This signifies a new line. And what's happened here, where we've printed it, we've printed the contents of the file as a string, is that the Python has basically automatically put these next lines onto these next strings, these next lines of the file onto new lines for us, so you don't actually see the new line character. But if we're putting all the data in a list, then we, because it's not printing it out as we would see it in a text editor, then we do see the new line character appearing there. So that's how we can get our data as a list from a text file. One other way we can read the whole file is with a for loop. So what we do to read the file as a for loop is, using a for loop, is we use the same code to open the file. Then what we do is we say for line in file. So we say for each line, so where we're going through our for loop, this variable here will store each line as we're iterating through our file. This variable here will store is the actual file handler. So we're saying for every line in this particular file that we've opened here, do some code here. Do this code. And as a simple example, I'm just going to print each line of the file. So I've written a print statement here, and I've got line as the argument of what we want to print. So that will print whatever's in this variable on each run of the loop, or each run of the loop code. And you'll notice that we've also got this extra argument here, this end argument. And usually when we're using a print statement, we don't need to specify that, because what it is by default is a new line character. So what Python does by default is it adds a new line character onto the end of whatever you want to print, and usually you do want this to happen. But here, because we've already got new line characters in our text file, I've overridden that and got it to print out nothing additional on the end of what we want to print. So let's try running this and see what happens. There we go, we got the contents of our file printed out using a for loop. And just to demonstrate why I added that extra argument there, let's see what happens when I take it away. We get each, what happens is we get each, after each line of the file, 2 new line characters are produced. So there's a new line character here moving the Python shell onto a new line. And then there's another new line character, so the next string is not printed out until the line after the first string. So that's why I added that. So that removes one of those new line characters and prints them out one after the other. Okay, so that's how we can read a file using a for loop. That's sometimes useful. We can read each line using a for loop. You may also want to read a particular line of a file, and if you don't know where your line is in the file that you want to read, the best way of doing that is you'd have to search through the file to find where that line of the file is. But if you do know where a particular line of the file is in the file that you want to print out or do something with, then we can use what's called the seek method. So what I can do here is say file.seek, and when we're reading a file, what happens is we get a cursor that starts at the first character of the file and keeps track of where we are in the file. And my line of the file computing starts after 6 characters, because there's 5 characters in hello and then there's the new line character. So what we're going to do is we're going to seek 6 characters from the beginning of the file. Then we're going to say line equals file.read line, and what this does is it reads the line of the file that we're on from the position in the file that we're at to the end of that line and stores it in the variable line. Then we're going to print line, and what this should do is it should print out just computing, and there we go, we get just computing printed out there. And to demonstrate a little bit more detail what this read line does, if I seek to let's say 8 characters into the file and run that, we get only part of the word computing because it's reading the line from the M character to the end of that line and then printing that out. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction tutorial on reading text files using Python. I'm going to do a separate tutorial video on how to write to text files using Python, and then another tutorial video on how to read and write CSV files, which is a type of text file which uses commas to separate values, which is why it's called a comma separated value file. Okay, so I hope you found this tutorial video useful, and thanks for watching.